For me, I've learned to try to find the person who's prepared to break the rules. Because the person who's prepared to break the rules is the person that will say, we don't normally do this, but that's the person you're trying to find. The person that says we don't normally do this, but because that person is prepared to try things that are not inside the box, is prepared to see your child, see their need, and work with that, and that be a priority.
Welcome to All Aboard, where we help parents navigate the ADHD journey. I'm Claire, and today we'll be talking to our first parent guest, Carrie Grant. Carrie is a BAFTA award-winning broadcaster who, along with her instantly recognisable bright red hair, has been a regular on our screens for over 20 years. From her days as a judge on Fame Academy and a coach on Pop Idol to a current reporter on The One Show. As a vocal coach, Carrie has worked with Take That, The Spice Girls, Gwyneth Paltrow, Demi Lovato, S Club 7, Will Young and Lamar. And as a singer, she's worked with Diana Ross, Sting, Fatboy Slim, Michael Jackson and Rod Stewart. Carrie is a passionate neurodiversity ambassador and active campaigner. One of her many achievements was supporting the launch of the world's first all-party parliamentary group for ADHD. She also runs a weekly support group for over 200 families. Carrie is married to David Grant, who awaits an ADHD diagnosis himself, and she is the proud mum of 4 neurodivergent children, 3 of whom are diagnosed with ADHD. She herself has autism. Last year, she and David published their book, A Very Modern Family, in which they share their incredible family story. The Times newspaper said their book was so much more than a parenting manual. The Grants have thrown out a lifeline. Carrie joins us today as the first of our parent guests to share her story and throw out that lifeline to our All Aboard ADHD listeners. Welcome aboard, Carrie.
Oh, it's so good to be here. Thank you, Claire.
Thank you for joining us. So I am very excited to speak to you today as the first of our parent guests to share their story.
No pressure.
no pressure at all. It's a big one. So thank you. You're the first. So I first discovered that you were the mum of neurodiverse children last year when you launched your book, A Very Modern Family, which is a profoundly brave story that resonates very deeply. You fight relentlessly for your own children and at the same time care enough to share all that honest experience and wisdom with other parents through your book and with us here today. So thank you.
Yeah, I think part of that's therapy.
Yeah, I understand that. I think this is the same with me too, because I'm the mum of a child with ADHD. I have ADHD, and like you, I set up a support group locally because I didn't want anyone to feel alone on this journey. But as you say, you work through your own stuff in the process. So yes, it's so true. So could you begin by telling us a bit about your family and your children, who I appreciate now very grown up, but with ADHD.
Well, not all. My youngest is 14, so not completely adult yet.
Not completely.
So we have 4 children, 3 birth, 1 adopted. They've all got different neurodivergences. And so it's a mishmash. So we have 3 out of the 4 have ADHD, although I'm suspicious about the 4th now. I think what happens in your journey is you go, right, you're this. And then as you go on, you go, actually, you're a little, it's neurospicy, isn't it? So it's like you've got a little bit of that going on there too. And so ADHD features heavily in our children, but also David, my husband, is waiting for an assessment. So I think he is one of the he's quite severely ADHD, I would say. So I think, like most of us grown-ups who didn't get a chance to get assessments when we were younger, we've somehow worked through it. But a lot of us are now waiting, aren't we? And David is one such person. Olive is 29, originally diagnosed with just dyspraxia, then ADHD. Next one down is Tylen, who is 22, and he is autistic and has dyscalculia and a little bit of dyslexia. And then the next one down is Arlo, who is autistic and has ADHD with a big dollop of pathological demand avoidance. So that's how their autism presents. We can get into that if you want to know what those things are. I'm just trying to avoid acronyms. You know what I mean? Like, just go. They got PDA, and everyone goes, "What on earth is PDA?" Yeah,
What does
Yeah,
that
I
mean?
mean,
It's a
isn't
good
that the
point.
case when you become a parent of a child with SEND? You're like, you enter an entire world of acronym where no one speaks in a regular language anymore. So I'm quite fluent in it now. But so then my 14-year-old son he's adopted. He was diagnosed quite young with ADHD, and more recently with DMDD, which is disruptive mood dysregulation disorder. Really worth looking up if your child's just the moods and mood swings and violence and those kinds of things. It's not something I had heard of, but it is something that is not uncommon in adoptive children and non-adopted children as well. But just when I looked up DMDD, it immediately goes to those stories that we had decades ago about the Romanian orphans, as they were known back then. And those children, some of those have presented with DMDD. So a lot of dyslexias and dyscalculias and dyspraxias. Our thing is don't dish yourself in our house. So yeah, we and then what we call multi-hyphenate. So not only are my children neurodivergent, they are all mixed race, 3 Afro-Caribbean, white English, and our adoptive son is East African white English. So different parts of the world, different cultures. And then we've got a lot of LGBT stuff going on. So lots of trans, non-binary identities. And it's been a learning curve. Yeah. I mean, I've just said it, or that's the end of the podcast, isn't it? Because it took so long for me to even just describe who these incredible children are that, it's a lot.
I think that's worthy of the introduction, though, because that's the really important thing, isn't it? Particularly when you put labels or acronym labels in place for all of this stuff, that's actually giving it the time to introduce people in full detail, in full colour, because as you say, they are incredible. So it's not just the diagnosis, it's an important part of obviously why we're here today, because we want to understand our children, we want to support them, we want to advocate for them, but they are so worthy of these amazing introductions.
Oh my gosh, they are. And those, a label is only a problem if you've got a problem with the label. I don't have a problem with those labels. Those labels for my children help them to navigate the world, because it helps the world to understand them. It describes what my children might be like, which is why it's really important that we have podcasts like this that describe what those things are. Otherwise, people that don't know will just assume what they are. And that's not so good. So we've got to understand that all of these areas, they all intersect as well. I've never met anyone who's got ADHD that hasn't got some traits of autism, and autistic people that don't have traits of ADHD. Those 2 areas particularly have huge amounts of overlap, particularly when it comes to anxiety, social anxiety, some of the things that impact children and adults with those conditions. Yeah.
So in terms of kind of spotting those differences then, and something you've obviously been the lookout for many years and got lots of experience in lots of different children, what were the early signs or behaviours that made you suspect ADHD in your children?
Yeah, so I think initially Olive was our first child diagnosed with ADHD, and they were late diagnosed. And so they were 18. And that, I believe, this is just what I was observing at that time, was just a child of colour growing up in a school that was predominantly a white school. I think that what happens is our children, we know that over 60% of Black and mixed race children will be sent down what we call an SEMH pathway rather than an SEND pathway. So rather than special educational needs and disability, it will be considered to be a social, emotional, mental health issue. So more likely to be judged as being, this is a naughty child. Let's, go with all the tropes of what we say about that culture, and let's put them down that. So it must be the parents. The parents, there's something going on there at home, and that's why this child is distracted at school, can't stay attentive in any way, blurts out suddenly, finds it hard to stay on task. All of those things that Olive was doing, that when I would go to pick them up at the end of the day, or David would go, we would always be being called in. And what they were judged as was, your child is really disobedient, because the teacher found it hard to hold the space within the class. It was, what's the problem? You're the problem, so you are bad. And so the narrative that began weaving through Olive's life from a very young age was something about you's wrong, something about you's bad. And the really strange thing for us as parents, and remembering, we can talk about this later, but remembering back then, this is our first child. So we're trying to do parenting the way that most people try and do parenting. We're like those strict, here's your boundary, double down on your boundaries.
The shoulds.
You know, the should. We're quite strict parents. So we were in absolute agreement with the school. But there was these conversations that were going on for David and I, which were, how is it that this is the child that's really, really compliant? Like, so compliant. This is the child, because back in those days, we'd have the naughty step. And this is the child you'd find on the naughty step. They'd sent themselves there. Like, you'd go, what have you done? And they'd be like, I just ate a sweet from the cupboard. And you'd be like, okay, stay there for a minute and then you get off. But, you know, that doesn't chime with a disobedient kind of willful disobedience. And Olive wasn't a child that was explosively drawing attention to themselves in the way that, and perhaps that's a gendered thing. You know, Olive was assigned female at birth. So sometimes we think, like, I think of my adoptive son who, you know, basically climbing the walls, jumping off stuff, banging his head, like literally accidents every day because he's run into something. Olive wasn't really like that. So those early signs were really just inattentive. And also because they had dyspraxia, they couldn't write quickly. So their motor skills, they were really slow. Imagination off the charts, speed of writing like a snail. And that is so frustrating for many of our ADHD community. These are the people that I've experienced. And obviously ADHD is experienced in so many different ways. But many of the people that I meet are super creative. And then there's been this thing of, I can't get this thing out. Either I'm distracted and I've got 20 great ideas in the morning and I can't fulfill them all, or just the speed at which they do stuff. So it's hard. It's like a super turbo boost on creativity and a snail pace of actioning those things for one reason or another. And in this case for Olive, it was just their ability to write quickly.
That can be such a frustrating disconnection. I know that I see that in my own son, sure.
So I think that was Olive, and the ADHD really made sense and helped them to filter. By the age of 18, though, of course, they've been told their whole school life that they are willfully naughty. So that for a little bit, they were living up to that title and that label. But I think there is a grief. I think when you are late diagnosed, there is a grief. I think no one thanks you for a late diagnosis. I don't understand this thing where people say, I'm just going to leave it for now. I'm just not going to even look at it for my child. Please do look at it, because your child will not thank you later on. If that child is diagnosed late and they've been told they're naughty for 16 years, there is a lot of undoing to do. There is trauma sitting there. And what that led to being naughty, what are your friendships like when you know that you're the naughty kid? Or all of that identity building goes off on a tangent that is so unnecessary. If you just understood, this is who I am, this is how I work, and I'm not naughty, I might be loud sometimes, I'm adventurous, I'm scatty, I'm all those things that Olive was when, and to an extent still is now. Whereas Arlo, being autistic and having ADHD, is a different thing. And you have there, and I'm sure parents will relate to this, where it's like your ADHD brain is writing checks that your ASD brain, your autistic brain, cannot cash. So
it's a good analogy. I like that.
The ADHD brain is going, come on, let's do it, let's jump off. And the autistic brain is going, let's line everything up and have order here. So that is a description of my 18-year-old's presentation of ADHD. And then Nathan is the classic boy, banging against walls, shouting, being loud, dysregulated, some of those areas that we would historically have seen as an ADHD behaviour.
Yeah, I think you were saying then the grief, the kind of possible risks or long-term impact of not diagnosing or late diagnosis is really significant. And so how did you feel, or how did they feel when you got that diagnosis? What did that do?
I think for Olive, because they were an adult, it really helped them to explain themselves. But I think they then, well, I think there was a way, there's looking back and there's like, okay, there's lots of things that weren't right. And then they have to square that. And as a parent, I have to try and square that, because I kind of backed up the school a lot of the time because I was that strict parent, like, yeah, you really do need to concentrate, you know. And it was only when they got into their teens that I began to kind of advocate for them and go, I'm not sure. I'd question the school, but, you know, for much of their schooling life, I kind of backed it up. So they had trauma, and they are now 29. They still talk about that trauma. So looking back, they have that. Then they were going to Guildhall to study acting. And at Guildhall, they then had to try and advocate for themselves, because parents aren't really allowed access at that point. So very overnight, they became someone who had to find their autonomy, advocate for themselves, know their needs, which you don't always know your needs. That's one of the things that I think is super hard, that parents are going, my child has needs. And then when someone actually gives you the time of day and says, what do you need? You're not always sure. And I think that's where we don't have that collaboration that allows us to find what's best for our children. So our children, like Olive, and even more so with the others, in fact, have come out of their school experience utterly traumatized. And that makes me angry, and rightfully angry. Our children should not be going to school and being traumatized. That is not what school is meant to do to our kids. And then there is no access to any kind of services to deal with that trauma. So we become therapist, educator, friend, parent, social life, organizer, even into their 20s because of the ADHD. So PA,
Yeah.
everything, all those roles we have to be. But I think owning it for each person is really super important. For Olive, really easy in a way, because 18 years old, you can say, right, you have ADHD. It's a lot more difficult when your child is 7 and you're telling them, well, do you tell them they've got ADHD? How do you? Parents struggle with that. What do I tell them at what age? Is it going to be helpful? Are they going to feel like, if all the images that we have of neurodivergence are wholly negative, the last thing you want to do is go, oh, by the way, you've got one of these things that makes you really negative. All that's going to do is endorse all those feelings of low self-esteem that have grown out of feeling like they're different. So there is an optimum point, I think, in each person, and that's different within each person, as to when you just get in that, okay, this is what's going on, this is how your brain works. And I think in different ways, I think my children have all owned their diagnosis at different points, even though, like, Ty would have known he was autistic. And I know this is about ADHD, but I think it crosses over. He would have known that when he was would have known that in primary school, but would not have talked about it until he was about 14. So there are all those years of not wanting to own it. And I think, then we're talking about shame, aren't we? And so shame is so useless. It's the most useless thing that exists. It doesn't help you in any way. And so just working through with your children how they feel about difference and how we model difference. You know, in my family, in a way, we are privileged, because none of us are neurotypical, none of us on what we call normal, that we have so many interfaces and intersections. We're a different family, and so we belong, and there is a sense of, you belong in this family, and this is how we all are. Wow. And then we go out into the world, we take this kind of little microcosm of people and say, hey, look at us, come and join us, you people, you belong with us. And that's how you create community. And I love that. But I think I'm mentioning all of that within how did they respond to diagnosis, because I think that finding community and sense of belonging is one of the most healing experiences that we have in life, when we feel like we're seen. like, you're beautifully ADHD, Claire. Look at your beautiful ADHD self. And we know that, you might be scatty at certain points and have 100 ideas and then think, how do I do all of this? And when I'm in an argument, I can't think quick enough, and all those things that we have. But you know what? There's also so many advantages to ADHD, Claire. There's so much that you're doing and you're giving and you're finding about yourself in the context of your ADHD. So in one way, it's a gift. And I've started more recently to thank my body for working the way it does, thanking my brain, going, yeah, do you know what? I love the way you work. You're off the wall most of the time, but actually I love that. I don't want to be anything else other than who I am. And that modeling that, being that, and getting to that point is important for all of us.
Honestly, I couldn't agree with you more. I think obviously people are diagnosed at different ages and different times, and then you're working with information that's age appropriate. But as parents, I feel so strongly, I really believe that it's us that gets to shape that. It's us that gets to create that positive sense of self-worth. It's us that gets to advocate for our children and, reflect that back on ourselves too, particularly if we have late diagnoses ourselves, and really create that community and shape that sense of support and being together in this and not being alone at all, which is, I guess, ultimately the point of this podcast. And you mentioned obviously the different ages of diagnoses, so that will have impacted education in a different way, and we've touched on what it's like pre-diagnosis, but then post-diagnosis you've got a situation where you've got an 18-year-old suddenly having to advocate for themselves when they're in kind of further higher education. I always get those around the wrong way, and you've got younger children going through that as well. So what impact did that have, or rather what accommodations or interventions were beneficial once you had those diagnoses for them?
Yeah, I mean, I know every parent watching this is like, what interventions? Well, we had loads of ideas. Whether we accessed them was a whole other thing. So I think to begin with, you hear about this two-worded sentence, reasonable adjustments. You're like, oh, okay, that sounds good. Let's see if we can get some of those. And then you are left at the mercy of the school initially, the teacher. You might get to meet the SENCO. I meet more and more parents who don't even meet the SENCO. I mean, for goodness sake, what's going on? And you have 3 types of people that you're going to meet. So you have people that just get it. Perhaps they're somewhere in the neurodivergent space themselves, and they feel it, they get it, they empathize. And for those teachers and those professionals, they wrap themselves around our kids and they work really well. If you get one of those teachers in the year, especially in primary school, you're like, yes, I've got that teacher that gets it. That's great, because you can go in and you can have a normal human conversation and it seems to work. And some of those reasonable adjustments, yes, they're written down in ways that are, official, but otherwise there's just a spirit, if you like, an energy in that classroom that just is very accepting. That teacher creates that. And that's the importance of teaching our teachers, that they are leaders. They are leaders. They lead that class and they create the atmosphere. And so that's number one, you love them. The second people, who I also love, funnily enough, are the people that know nothing but are willing to learn. Those people are great. I've had those people that have come along and said, Carrie, I know nothing about your child. They're coming into my year. My friend has got a little bit of teaching on autism and has taken me through some bits, but can you help me? I love those people because they come with that invitation to collaborate. So those people exist. They definitely exist. The worst type 3, are those that think they know everything about your child and the subject, but they don't. Those people are the utter nightmare, because those people demand us as parents to somehow retrain them. And that is, if they've also got a little bit of uppity attitude going on, they're not going to want us to go in and tell them, actually, it doesn't really work like this. That's not actually what autism is. That's not what ADHD, that's not how ADHD works. Or more specifically, that's not what's happening for my child. So, and how they may have been taught, they may have you know, I even heard about this yesterday, and we're in Mental Health Week as we're recording this. A guy just saying his child's going to school with his ADHD, they think, not been diagnosed, child going to school, and he's in isolation at the moment. So I said, what do you mean? He said, well, he spends 6 hours on his own, but actually today's a difficult day because he's got 2 lots of detention that are an hour each. So he's got 6 hours of isolation followed by 2 hours of detention. If that child doesn't kick off in those 8 hours, it's an absolute blinking miracle. And then the minute that child does kick off, what are the school going to do? They're going to give them more ice. It just
breaks your heart. It really, really, really
it
breaks
really
your heart.
does. So how do we have to see ourselves? For me, it's about positioning. I am a leader of my home, in my home, not of it. My husband's also a leader. My children are also leaders. We're all leaders in our own way. We are leading our lives. We've got to get in there and find the people that will be on side with us and try to collaborate with them. We don't have to be uppity about it. We can go in generously, sweetly, nicely initially. We try all those ways and we try to work with them and do what we can. And hopefully we get some really good best practice happening. Sometimes that happens and it's wonderful when it does. More often, unfortunately, parents go in and they try to do that collaboration thing. And for one reason or another, the teacher or the SENCO or the head or the senior leadership team, someone says no. And when you get no, you're then in a very difficult position because your child is then not getting the help that your child needs. So you might have a school that is a little bit more on it and says, we need to try and get an EHCP for your child. You've then got all the battle of what that EHCP looks like. And many of us as parents think, if I get the EHCP, that's a golden ticket to, that is it. I'll get the help. My child will really get the help they need. Unfortunately, even with an EHCP, it doesn't always work that way. So I sound wholly negative with everything I'm saying, but this is just the experience that I run a support group with over 200 families, and this is the story for the last 10 years for them and for us for many more years. So I think for me, I've learned to try to find the person who's prepared to break the rules. Because the person who's prepared to break the rules is the person that will say, we don't normally do this, but that's the person you're trying to find. The person that says we don't normally do this, but because that person is prepared to try things that are not inside the box, is prepared to see your child, see their need and work with that, and that be a priority. And unfortunately, in some of our situations, and we've experienced this, I would go in to Ty's school and I would say, please, could we, look, the EHCP's got these things in, is that possible to do? And they would say, well, if we do that for Thailand, we're going to have to do it for everybody. And I'd be like, but Ty's autistic. And then they would say, but people don't know that Ty's autistic and it's not our job. We have to keep that, all the stuff about secrecy. So Ty didn't get any help. And Ty was they would say, our school is an institution. You'd be like, they'd be so proud of it. I'd be like, what a shame. That's a sad thing.
That's not a good thing.
And so, Ty ended up, and we couldn't access CAMS because we didn't meet the threshold. So Ty ended up on a trigger warning on suicide watch. And that was really difficult. And actually, we only accessed CAMS properly on the second visit to hospital. So we know that, and yesterday a report came out that said CAMS referrals are up by 52%. So we know that it's no longer just the neurodivergent people that are trying to get access, or the adoptive, those that are slightly more vulnerable. Now, there's just your regular neurotypical kids need help. So we have to look at what's going on in the system. And this is one of the things I think is hard for teachers, is that they're working within an impossible system. Some are just RC anyway, but there are also those that are trying to do their best, but the system is impossible because that teacher's got 30 kids they've got to get through SATs, and your child keeps shouting out. And so we had loads of strategies. Things like blurt boxes in the classroom, which were brilliant for Arlo. Arlo needs to just go, this is really boring. if it's boring. And of course, everyone would laugh and then the teacher would lose the class. And so Arlo had this little box with a post-it bit in the middle of it. And Arlo would write down, this is really boring, and post it in the box. And then at break or at some other point in the day, the TA or the teacher would say, should we have a look what's inside that box? What you got going on there today? What are you thinking, Arlo? And Arlo could hold those thoughts if Arlo knew that later someone would get back to them and hear what Arlo is experiencing. And so that was really good. Having time out, being able to walk out the class, having the little card that goes on the front of the desk that's blue on one side, tiny little card, so it's not a big kind of everyone looking at you. Blue card says I'm fine. Yellow card says I need to get out of here now. So you just turn that card over. Our children use that a lot. Early lunch passes, friendships. I mean, friendship stuff is really important. Our children often struggle with socializing and not understanding how to do friendships or wanting to take over every game. Just having some children. There were always the kind kids in the class, and it's appealing to those kind kids. What a wonderful gift our children are to a classroom. I talk sometimes to other parents. There are parents who have neurotypical children and they brought those children up to be so kind. And I'm so grateful for those. Those kids are going to be, I think they're going to be running the country, some of those kids, because they have such kindness and they know how to be inclusive. And I just think they're the future, along with our kids, of course. But, those, I think I salute those parents. And I'm always someone who goes up to parents and thanks them and goes, oh my gosh, your child played with my child yesterday and my child was so worried about not getting help. So thank you. Those reasonable adjustments that are in the playground, in the eating canteen, in the classroom, everywhere your child goes in school. But more than anything, your child needs to feel like they belong. And if they don't feel like they belong, that child is traumatized because I don't fit. I lose confidence. I don't want to go to school. In fact, I'm not going to school. I'm not going to go at all. And then as parents, we're like we did it for a while. We were literally like pushing our child or children into the car to go to school, and doesn't work.
That's very hard.
It really doesn't. So yeah, there's the school stuff, which with Tyler, when Tyler was out of school, they didn't want to be in school, and they had a TA assigned as part of their EHCP, and part of the EHCP said that TA would attend the lessons that Ty was missing in the morning and just make notes. And then, because Ty's actually really bright, and would catch up with Ty later. When Ty would go in at 1, TA would sit there, go, right, this is what happened in English, blah, 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 blah. Private lesson, brilliant. And then my local authority had one SEN officer who was an absolute, just the best guy ever. And when do we hear people say that? But this guy was great. And he came into the school, and the school were like, we're not doing anything. We can't do anything. In fact, I'll get back to the SEN officer in a moment. I had an email at one point that arrived from the head, and it wasn't meant to be to me. It was meant to be just the Senko, but I was copied in by mistake. And it said, you do not have to answer Mrs. Grant's emails. I suggest we stand well back and watch the fireworks go off.
Wow.
And I felt betrayed, but in a way I was pleased I saw it, because, when you just know they're talking about you like that, but you just don't have evidence. This just showed me the lack of respect that they had for me as a parent. And so my local authority guy goes into this meeting. We're renegotiating the EHCP. And how funny that actually the major negotiations weren't with the local authority, they were with the school. And the local guy said, okay, they've got a TA, you're paying that TA. If Thailand can't get into school, let's send the TA home and do the teaching at home on the days that Ty can't make. The school were like 100%, no way, we're getting the unions in, you won't have us do this. And the local authority guy was like, no, I think you will do this actually. In fact, I'd like us to think about which TA you would like to send to their house.
Wow.
I literally sat there going, oh my gosh. But we have these moments of absolute trauma where we're waking up at 4 a.m. and just going, I can't do it. I can't do this anymore. I just can't do parenting. It's too hard. And then we have moments of breakthrough. And when those moments come, I just embrace them fully. And I sat there in that meeting thinking, this guy's just a gift. He's a gift to me and my family. And he's now a friend, which is lovely. He's left the local authority and he now works with parents because that was his heart. He's just a great guy. But, that made a big difference. That teacher came to our house. Actually, Ty went into school more because Ty knew that they had this backdrop where he could get here. Okay, so there's that. And then there's also Arlo, who was out of school for 3 years. So that happens a lot for our children. They end up, there isn't a school for them if their needs are really profound. And so Arlo is now in a specialist school, which is amazing. So a couple of things I want to say about that. For parents, jump ship quicker. I think we go mainstream is it, and I want to keep my child as normal as possible. Actually, special schools are amazing. I didn't realise this for ages. I wish I had realised that earlier. So my child ended up, there wasn't a special school for them for 3 years. So they were out of school 11 to 14. And then in an amazing school, special school, which is great. But 3 years out of school is you're never going to get those years back. That's trauma. During those years that are really developmental. So we need to make sure that somehow we just keep knocking on doors and asking people to change things. That's why I keep doing what I'm doing for the next group of parents that are coming up, tearing their hair out like I was. Like, we've got to keep doing this. If we do it together, our voice gets louder and those adjustments can be made. But, it's not easy, is it? It's hard out there.
It's really not easy, but I wholeheartedly agree with you. This is and in fact, whenever I email the school or whenever I say anything or whenever I'm talking, I always say, this is not just for my son. This is for all the children at this school and beyond, for every teacher that perhaps learns of something new about ADHD or uses a different adjustment, that they may then go on to take that into other schools and positively impact other children, because it's about making a difference. School is almost an environmental problem for our kids as opposed to our children being the problem. So if we kind of flip it then and think about that from a more positive standpoint, because you said that earlier, there are so many amazing things that come with ADHD and neurodiversity. Can you share like a success story or a positive memorable moment or unique strength that makes you super proud as a parent of neurodiverse children?
Oh my gosh, there are just so many. I think that when we move from the model of reading, writing, arithmetic, which is, the 3 R's they call them, although that really annoys me because it's not spelt right. So as an autistic person, it just irritates. But I want the 3 C's, which is curiosity, creativity, and community. For me, we work at the entrance point is the curiosity. So the experiences where people took the time to be curious, to allow my child's curiosity to come out. So I think that's happened for Arlo, that Arlo is now 18, but I would say for the last 4 years, the school have met my child at their point of entry. So they've said, are you interested in Pokemon? Let's just do a whole project on Pokemon. And then you find that, do you know what? In order to do Pokemon, you're going to need maths. You're going to need it because you're counting up how many percentage, they've got of strength, and you want to put them up some more and give them more power and all those things. You're going to need to know maths. And then we're going to need to know, we're drawing them today. So you're going to need to know art and perspective. And then actually we're going to write about Pokemon today. So you're going to need your literacy skills. And so if you find that entry point, all of the education that we need, including curiosity, which is the most important and the one that should be carried through lifelong learning that we all do. I'm doing an MA now, I'm 58. So lifelong learning, if we're to create lifelong learners, we have to encourage curiosity and meet our children at the point of interest. I know that for parents with neurodivergent children, they'll be going, please, yes. And people that don't have neurodivergent children will go, what about my child? Well, how are you going to do that with 30 kids? You don't have to do that with 30 kids. You work out a program that works for everybody. You work out a curriculum. It's not rocket science to do this stuff. And so I saw Arlo just flourish. And from that place, because Arlo was doing something that he was interested in, his anxiety was lowered, and then his concentration improved because he wasn't worried about everything. He became more confident and his esteem grew. And then you could get Arlo doing stuff that perhaps he didn't want to do. So it would be like, we're going to try cooking. I don't want to do cooking, would have been like, I don't want to do it. Now Arlo goes into school, cooks lunch and cooks something every day. As part of the curriculum. And I think those softer skills are really, really important. And again, it's an entry point for all of the other stuff that they need to learn. So I think that, that project-based work is really, really helpful. I would also like to say, and this isn't a school story, but I think it goes to show you what difference it makes. When Tylen was 16 and Tylen auditioned for Hollyoaks and got a job playing an autistic character on Hollyoaks gave everybody in the cast and the crew 2 days autism training. So it means that when Tylen got on a train and went to Liverpool, all the things that were huge, learnt a script and met a bunch of strangers and acted with them and worked with them, it meant the lighting rigger on Hollyoaks has had more neurodivergence training than any teacher that Tylen has ever had in his entire school career. And so some of it is really simply about training. It's about people understanding our children. And that was a success story because Tylen had been on and off suicide watch for 3 years and went from that to being able to get on trains, being able to act, being able to be with new people all the time. There are 6 crews working every day at Hollyoaks. So you could be with whatever crew you're in. You don't know where you're going to go the next day. But they gave Ty a quiet space of his own that he could just go to. If there were going to be loud bangs on set, there would be warning. They'd send me emails. They'd be like, we're using this costume for Ty this week. It's got glitter in it. It might be a bit itchy. Do you think Ty would be okay with that? Like literally, they would just run stuff by me. It's not a big deal. Just ask the guy. I'd be like, no, Ty's fine with that. But Ty doesn't like it when there's loads of supporting actors on set, when there's like 20 people on set and the cameras. So can we make those scenes in between each take? Ty needs to just go off set and come back when they're ready to shoot. So just really doesn't cost there's no budget for that. It's just a simple thing. And I think this is what bugs me, is that so much of our arguments are around there's not enough budget to help your child. Well, what about you change your mindset? If you have the right mindset, my child would actually be 50% of the way there. And a lot of these issues are purely to do with a teacher believing in our child. I'm not expecting you to love my child like I love my child. You're not their parent. But I do expect you as a teacher to believe that you can plant something in my child that will really bring about a great harvest in my child. So there's been so many instances where teachers have been project-led, have heard my child, have listened to my child, have set up friendship clubs. There's been so many things that have happened along the way. Early school access to the canteen, simple things like that, quiet spaces. These things have changed, and they're small adjustments. They cost nothing, literally zero. They're not asking for a TA. They're asking for an early lunch pass. That doesn't cost you anything. They're asking for the table that's a quiet table at the back. What does that cost you? Nothing. They're asking to be project-led. What does that cost you? Nothing. This is not about budget. It's about your willingness to come outside your box and actually think in a different way.
And for our children to be understood. And as you say, that costs nothing. So, I mean, on that note, what one piece of advice would you leave parents with to help them feel less alone on this ADHD or neurodiversity journey?
Oh my gosh, I feel like I have so much to say. So I'm going to do one piece that's like 20 sentences to get it all
yes,
in.
Please do.
Just because we haven't really talked about parents.
That's true.
We talked about school and parents. I have never met better parents than SEND parents. You are the best. Please don't compromise on that knowledge. You are the very best. You are the people that had your children, you had it all worked out how you were going to do it, and then you got surprised, and then you're literally shape-shifting every day to try and work out, how the hell do I do this journey? I can't do it. I'm not equipped. You are equipped and you're doing it, and every day you love on your child, they are growing and they are becoming who they're meant to be. So you are enough. I would say to parents, jump ship quick, because I think when we have a predetermined way that we're going to do parenting, we get these children, and this way of parenting doesn't work. You have to jump ship and be confident in jumping ship, even when the rest of your family are going, what are you doing there? Well, they get away with murder, these kids. Or even your partner, if you're fortunate enough to, if you're single parenting, I salute you. I don't know how you're doing it. You're amazing, right? David and I both grew up single parents. But if your partner, like David, didn't jump ship, he was 1.5 years, 2 years after me. I was like, we need to do it differently. We need to try different ways. And he was like, we need to double down. So we were in conflict, is to try and work out, please jump ship. Don't be afraid to jump ship. When you do, your parenting, it just is so much easier and your child responds so much better. But there's also this thing, I think, particularly if you're empathetic, so that goes for whatever gender, but just sometimes we embody our children, we climb into their skin in order to feel them and to understand them and to try and fight for their needs, is to remember who we are. We are not our child. Is to remember to climb back out and go, hello, look in the mirror and go, hi, I'm Claire. This is who I am. Hi, I'm Carrie. You're still your person. Your personhood matters as much as you're trying to help your child develop their identity, is to really understand who you are, and that you are worth something. And you are still something outside of your parenting role. Even though it takes up 23 hours of your day, that 1 hour you get, that's you. And make sure you get that 1 hour to remind yourself that you are also your own person. Yeah. And also in terms of parenting stuff, I have so many tips and stuff, and get the books, there's loads in there, but just, you don't need to solve their problems. I think so often, not the school stuff, yeah, that's different. But when we're on our own with our kids, it's about hearing them. It's about seeing them. It's about listening. It's about silence. I used to go in to Tylen's room and I would sit on the end of the bed and I was like, I'm going to just sit here for a minute. And Tylen was, a teenager, and would go, what are you doing? And I'd be like, I'm just sitting on the end of the bed. They go, all right, I'll be here for a minute. And they'd look at their thing and they go, right, you've been here for a minute. Can you leave? And I'd leave. And then I'd go back the next day and I'd wait for a minute. And at the end of every minute, they go, can you leave? And after about a week, I upped it to 2 minutes. I'm going to be here for 2 minutes. They were like, oh. And then I'd walk in after 2 weeks and they were like, are you doing that weird thing when you just sit on the end of the bed and say nothing? I'd be like, yeah, I'm doing that. And after a couple of weeks, Ty one day just said, I'm really sad. And in that moment, I could have come out with all my strategies and all my ideas, but I didn't. For the first time, I just said, I hear you, you're sad. I repeated back what they said. And I said, I actually can't change that. But what I can do is I can sit with you in this place. And I can just sit with you and your sadness. And we just sat there. Ty cried. And after about 10 minutes, I said, okay, I'm gonna go now. And then I trotted downstairs and I thought, I don't know if that worked. I think it did, because they spoke. And then I would go back every couple of days and I'd just sit there and they would cry or they would just sit and we're just going to sit with the sadness. And eventually the sadness began to shift just because I held the space for it. I didn't try and solve it. I couldn't solve it. I'm not big enough. I'm not clever enough. I don't have the tools. But what I can do is sit with it. And it made me realize that's what so many of our children need. They just need this to just hold the space for me. And now my kids are a little bit older. They'll do that thing. They go, Mom, can you do that thing where you sit on the end of my bed? And they're not asking much. I mean, I can do that. Oh my gosh, the pressure's off. I don't have to think of all this stuff I've got to do. I've just got to sit and be and hold it and go, yeah, it's shit, isn't it? Yeah, I agree.
It's very powerful, Carrie. Very powerful. I feel quite emotional because I think it's so true, actually. And I think I'm learning this now that my son he's 12, almost about to turn 13, that you start to have to show up in a different kind of way, and I'm learning just to be there alongside him. And I think that's a very beautiful story, that we can't solve everything. We don't have to solve everything. We can't, but just be there with them.
No. And you're right. And it's that slowing down thing of, especially for ADHD, slowing down the conversation. Is the brain's going at 100 miles an hour, and processing is just like, wah, fight, flight all the time. So it's when we slow things down and we don't have a kind of agenda or a program, or this is what I need to be getting them into now, or this is where he should be out. I'm looking at all the other kids. It's just, you know what? It's a slower road. It don't matter. So he might take till he's 30 to do what the neurotypical kids are doing at 20. But I tell you what, at 30 he's going to be incredible. My kids, I'm looking at them now. Please don't give up hope. My children they always were incredible, but now I'm like, wow, they're world changers. They're doing stuff that I could only have dreamt of. They're off the charts, and I like them. They're lovely, decent human beings because of what they've been through. They're incredible. So, and they get out their rooms and they don't stay in their rooms. They don't stay in that place of depression. They move on. They move on from violence. They move on. They mature. So please don't let go of hope. Hope is there, and children evolve the way that we evolve.
That's such a hopeful and inspiring and just actually really happy way to end our conversation, Carrie. Thank you so much for sharing your story. It's been such a privilege to talk to you. Thank you for everything you do to fight for our kids, and for sharing so honestly.
Thank you.
I know, I have no doubt that you've helped me even in this conversation. So for the people listening, I know that you will have helped us all feel less alone. Thank you.
And thanks. That was a great therapy session for me.
Likewise. It's amazing, isn't it, when we share our stories, how much they resonate, how deeply they resonate. So thank you.
Right. Thank you.
If you'd like to learn more about Carrie's work and read her book, A Very Modern Family, then please do check out our show notes below for links along with more information. And if you enjoyed this episode and found it helpful, please can you follow and review All Aboard to help other parents find this podcast and welcome them aboard our journey too. Thank you for listening to All Aboard.